Hello everyone, this is Dan Vuksanovich at whyisuckatguitar.com, and today's lesson is part one of a series entitled I Suck at Guitar because my fretting hand is a tense, inaccurate mess. The basics of tension. Tension is a requirement of any physical activity. Without tension, we couldn't stand, sit, walk, run, or do anything besides lie in a crumpled heap on the floor. What we want to do is get rid of the wrong kind of tension, the tension that creates the claw. Why does the claw happen? The root cause of the claw is uncoordinated use of the muscles in the arm and hand. At this point, I'd like to define two different muscle groups, the flexors and extensors. Now, we have flexors and extensors all over our body, but the ones that we're concerned with are in our hand and forearm. The flexors are on the inside of our hand and on the underside of our arm. These are the muscles that help us turn our hand into a fist. Extensors are on the opposite side, the outside of the hand and the top of the forearm. These are the muscles that allow us to open our hand up and flatten it out. The claw happens when these two muscle groups fight against each other. So how do we fix it? We fix it through thorough examination of how we're using our muscles. A deeper dive into the root cause. What movements specifically are causing the problem? What fingers specifically are causing the problem? We also need to have a slow, rational approach to retraining our muscles. This is where challenging assumptions comes in. If you've been playing with tons of tension for years, this is going to feel different, and that's a good thing. Now granted, different doesn't mean it should hurt. This lesson is not about forcing your fingers to do things with brute force. This is about using less force and more coordination. Ultimately, fretting notes should feel easy. So for a deeper dive into the root cause, what I thought I would do was give you a rundown of some of my own problem areas and how I addressed them. I had three main problem areas that I had to address before I even got into the motion of my fingers. The first one was thumb placement. This is the most relaxed state, pretty much, that our hand can be in. Notice that the thumb is outside the fingers. However, for years, I kept my thumb underneath my fingers and about halfway across my hand. Now, if you try this yourself, you'll notice that as soon as you move your thumb across your hand, your fingers start to do some crazy things and get tense. Second, I had some side pull issues, especially with my index finger and my pinky. And basically what I wasn't doing was that I wasn't keeping my fingers, quote unquote, in their lanes. Our fingers are happiest when we can keep them extending and flexing straight and basically parallel with each other. So instead of doing this, I had this going on. And third, I had improper forearm rotation. Now my pinky is disproportionately short relative to the rest of my fingers. So I had my forearm rotated all the way in with the idea that I would give my pinky some help by bringing it closer to the strings. But what I was actually doing was putting my other three fingers and my thumb in some really unnatural positions. And the solution to all this was rotating my forearm outward a little bit. That solved my fingers being in their lanes problem, because if you notice, now that I have my forearm rotated outward a little bit, I can very easily flex and extend my fingers in a straight line in parallel with each other. And my thumb is now naturally outside my fingers. So the next thing I did was I came up with some tests. And these are basically motion tests so that I could make sure that certain parts of my body weren't rigid while I was playing. The first one had to do with my wrist. So as I fretted a note with each finger, I would make sure that I could move my wrist. Very simple. Now, I wasn't playing scales. I wasn't playing even two notes in a row. I was just fretting a note with each finger, making sure that I could keep my wrist flexible. I did the same thing with my thumb. Can I fret a note with each finger and move my thumb? And the idea here is our thumb should be resting against the back of the guitar, not jammed into the back of the guitar. I came up with 3 tests for my fingers. The first one was the vibrato test. So I would fret a note with each finger, and then using these 2 joints right here, I would apply just a little bit of vibrato to the string. And this isn't vibrato for sound. Sometimes I wouldn't even pick the note, like I'm not picking the note right now. The idea is we want to make sure that our fingers can move while we're fretting the note, because if they can move, it means they're not rigid. Second finger test is the non-fretting finger motion test. So when I'm fretting a note with one finger, can I move the fingers that aren't fretting notes? Once again, if I can move those fingers, it means they're not rigid. Third is the releasing a fretted note test. And this is a really important one because I think too often we focus exclusively on fretting notes, but releasing notes is the other part of the motion. And if we don't let go with our flexors before we release a note, then we get into a situation where our flexors and extensors are fighting against each other because our extensors are trying to release, but our flexors haven't let go of the fretted note. There's the picking hand test, and this is really more of just an awareness test. Is my picking hand rigid? Is it all tight while I'm playing? Because if that's the case, I'm going to get sympathetic tension likely in my fretting hand. And then there's the rest of my body. There are any number of places in the rest of your body that could lock up and get rigid while you're playing, and that will adversely affect your hands. In my case, my 2 problems were my jaw, which would clench when I would play, and my breathing, which isn't really a muscle, but if you stop breathing, it's kind of a problem. So there you go. There are some tests that you can apply and use them to figure out where your specific problem areas are. So what about accuracy? If you remember, the title of this lesson included the words tension and inaccuracy. Reducing unnecessary tension will automatically increase accuracy. We'll talk specifically about accuracy later on in this series of lessons, but understand for now that increasing rigidity in your muscles reduces accuracy, so then reducing muscle rigidity will increase accuracy. Your homework. Examine your muscles as you fret various individual notes. Are your wrist, fingers, and thumb rigid, or can you move them easily? Apply some of the motion tests. Are you flexible or rigid? What are the specific joints and motions that you need to focus on the most coming out of an examination of your muscles and the applications of these tests? Study how you release notes. Fretting notes is only half of the required motion. Releasing them is the other. If you don't get good at releasing notes, you will build up unnecessary tension. And finally, incorporate a focus on reducing unnecessary tension into your practice routine. This is not something that you can do for 15 minutes one day and then forget about it. If you want to undo the bad habits that you've built up over time, you need to focus on this over an extended period of time. In conclusion, remember, fast is slow and slow is fast. I mentioned that in one of the prerequisites, and if you didn't watch the prerequisites, shame on you. The more you try to rush, the more you will slow yourself down. Enjoy gaining control over your muscles and building coordination. The rush you'll get when you start to see results and playing gets easier is well worth it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time at whyisuckatguitar.com.